Okay.
And I believe I've done that right. We'll find out. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here today. Cold December morning. Um, just want to spend a little bit of time going through a variety of IMS items. Kind of on our first. Oh, and you can see up on screen here. This has been shared with all of you, so it's this agenda with some links in it. Of course, you can follow along on your own in your own Google Docs if you'd like. But at least for some of the meeting, we'll go ahead and share the screen like this so we can kind of all be looking at the same thing at the same time. And starting out, you can see we have special education count. This is really more just kind of a reflection on how this year went. A few items to kind of talk about, and even some of the later follow-up items have to do with some of the things that maybe popped up during the count season and things we can be watching in the future and so forth. So I am going to go ahead and let Joni and Karen start with a couple of these items, just kind of recapping the count. And let's please, anybody jump in at any time with comments, with questions. If everybody keeps their mic off, unless they're talking, we won't have the feedback, but just whenever you want to jump in, just click your mic on and we'll hear you. So Joni and Karen, I'm going to go ahead and, shall I stop sharing? Do you guys, or should I just leave this up for right now?
I would just leave it up, Ron.
Okay. You just yell at me if I need to take it off or something.
Really?
Yes, that'll be fine.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Some questions came up about size of the count comments field in the standalone, the lower right-hand field where we enter any count comments, whether things are okay as is. John checks if he has questions. Those do not need to contain 10 years worth of data, just the most recent year. So if you find that there's too much information in there and you can't fit the most recent stuff in there, you can take out past year's information. Does that make sense?
You will notice too that we went ahead and took some of them out so that it wasn't such a long report.
Consistency in the count reports. We're asking that you punch your reports at the top. Some of them were punched at the bottom, and then we had questions about when they were printed, whether they'd been updated or not. So if you could punch them at the top, that would be helpful, because if you punch them at the bottom, you punch out the date that they were printed. So that was one problem we came across. Send in your actual meeting copies of reports. The copies that you take to your count meetings and you go through with your districts, don't fix them and then reprint them and send those in for the count meeting, because then we can't double check to make sure that the changes that you went over with the district, that those changes have been made. We need the actual meeting copies that you took with you to your count meetings. Support service rosters, they really need to be run after the count date, after all IEPs have been entered and validated. Don't try running them, on Wednesday or Thursday before count date and handing them out because you don't have all your information in. You don't have all the IEPs entered and validated, so there's still these changes after that. So just make sure you do those after, just like you do with your head count reports for the schools. Do those after you have all your IEPs entered. Okay. Any questions on that? The count work copy, we're going to be redoing that to allow for R1 and R3 entries. There's been some confusion as to how those are listed, and so we'll add those on that count work copy.
Joni, what we're going to add is R2 and R3. R1's already on there.
Yeah, I think I just said R2 and 3. So those will be added on there. So you know how those will be listed in the future. We're going to modify the add drop sheets, the tool that we've been using. Sorry, I just got a text from Emily. She's on a late start, so she's missing meeting. The tool that you use that's at the end of the account packet for the add and drops, we're going to be taking a look at changing those because they're pretty plentiful number of sheets there, and we want to make it a little more user friendly. So we're needing to look at what works well with that and what changes you'd like to see. And I know because of the size of the district and how many changes they often have because of the size of the district. I know Council Bluffs, I've already talked to them about it, what they would like to see changed or how they would like to see that look. So we'll be looking at that too. The date of the IEPs. We had some IEPs that were started, say, November 2nd, and they were backdated to October 26th. That's just an example. IEPs should not be backdated. If they don't have the IEP done by head count, they can't backdate it and say, oh, I meant to do this or I meant to do that. So if you as you're getting those IEPs in, be sure and pay attention to when they were started, because if they were started after count date, they should not be backdated. I had asked Lisa to see if they could make a change in the system to prevent that, or to maybe limit that to like an emergency only basis. I mean, I'm sure there are times, rarely, when that might be needed, but I don't see that being the norm. So move-in IEPs, we need to be paying attention to those again.
Jody,
Yeah.
I have a question about that date thing.
Uh-huh.
And how do I know when they started it unless I go by the date of the IEP? You know, there used to be a date at the bottom that said like when it was going on in the system, but I don't see that anymore.
It's in the log.
Okay, so we'd have to go to the log itself, not it was on the front, you know, the first screen that would tell us like so and so changed it, like in the standalone. It tells you who changed what when.
Okay.
But the web doesn't do that. So we just have to go to the log.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess what I look at is I run a report on head count day or the day after what IEPs are still out there that I still need to work on. And so if I have a surprise pop up after that, that's a red flag to me. If I see an IEP on, you know, November 2nd that needs to be validated, and I'm like, this wasn't on my list before. So I go in and look and see, oh, well, they just started it today. They didn't start it before. So then I follow up and find out, why was this backdated? So it's more of a protection for you as well, because if that meeting was not held or if that discussion was not held prior to by head count date, they can't be making a change just because, oh, well, I forgot to add this or I forgot to add that. And so it's just a protection for you as well.
Hey, Ron, can you go ahead and click on that move-in IEP if all the questions are done, the handout?
Okay, I got that last one there. I don't know that I got that covered. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, no, you got move in. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so what we did, because I know that there's a lot of questions about move-in IEPs, and I kind of did some further checking into it. So there is some excerpt from the Special Ed Procedures Manual, because I'm sure you're going to have some certified staff asking questions too. Move-in IEPs, the only purpose for those is to get a kid on count. So in May, March, September, move-in IEPs is not an option. The only time it's an option is in October. Okay, and you can see that I took it from the manual, and you can see that we kind of added different information in there. The one thing that I noticed was an amendment cannot be done on a move-in IEP. And the manual states that the complete Iowa IEP must be developed as soon as practical. I know a lot of times we say 30 days, but typically if we go by what the manual says, it says as practicable. So we can't really tell them 30 days. We just need to tell them to do an IEP as soon as possible. I would say best practice is 30 days, but if we go back to the manual, we just have to tell them to get it done as soon as possible. If you want to go ahead and scroll down a little bit further, Ron, for me, please. Thank you. You'll also note that for our move-in IEP, the forms that are needed are tab F, tab G with the transportation question, and the RSD tab. They would need to, the date, the one thing I do want to say is Form A needs to be done too with a date. That is not the date of the previous out-of-state IEP. That is the date when it started in Iowa. Now that could be the date the kid started, but it needs to be when it's fairly opened. Because what happens if you have a kid that it's now October 10th, 15th, 20th, the kid actually started in March. The IEP should not be dated in March then. It should really be dated now. Is there any questions on that?
I would just throw in, I mean, this does, seems like it continues to come up as a point of confusion. I just had someone the other day really actually thinking, you know, a kid moved in from North Carolina and they were thinking that they might use the move-in, but as was said, this is really the whole purpose of this choice. And again, that we're talking about the meeting type was for those cases where you know, in the past districts would be frustrated because, you know, a family would literally move in the day before count or something like that, and they were potentially a legitimate kid that should be on the count because they'll have an active IEP. This is just a way to get them in the system. You know, the bare minimum amount of information would go into Web IEP and then into IMS to allow them to be counted. And in fact, this information, that it was kind of reiterated in the release notes this year because I think statewide a lot of people got confused about this. And then that's the part about it's temporary and then write a full IEP as soon as it's practical. That has been there, and I don't. The tricky part is I don't know if there's a way to. I think the system would allow, and someone correct me if I'm wrong. Will the system allow if they wrote a move-in IEP the day before count this year? Would it allow it to sit there for a long period of time? I think it would technically, but they're supposed to have an active. I mean, they would technically be out of compliance if they didn't get that done fairly quickly. But there's not a specific amount of days, like 30 days or anything like that. But soon, it should be done soon.
And the other thing about that is if they move in, say in November, and they put the date of the last annual, say the kid had a last annual in September, if they date that September and you go ahead and validate it, it looks like that kid should have been on count. So then the district's going to come back later and say, why wasn't this kid on count? His IEP is dated September. So that's another reason why they should not be backdating those to the previous IEP date. They need to date it like the date the kid moves in.
Is the end date the date of the IEP?
The end date
Duration date.
on a move-in?
A while back, we were told that, that it wasn't 30 days anymore, that it was until the out-of-state IEP was due, that the move-in was good until that date.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was just checking. Sorry, I'm just joking.
I would agree with that, but in further looking, and I think that I do agree that that's what we told you guys.
Yeah,
And
it was.
Yep, it was, I know. But when in looking at the manual, it says a complete Iowa IEP must be developed as soon as possible. I would go with that. The duration to date, I can understand, but I believe it should probably be changed to 30 days out. What do you think, Jody?
I think that would be a good idea. The thing is, if they do a move-in IEP, they can't, and they don't put any goals in there, they can't progress monitor. I mean, there's no leeway, there's no way to monitor what the kid is doing and what they're doing with them in the classroom. So the best thing to do is to do a full IEP. And some of them actually do, they mark it as a move-in and then they'll do the whole IEP. So I'm not sure why they leave it as a move-in.
You know, and this is this honestly is one that's kind of evolved over the years at the state level. It really has, because I can remember a number of years back where I'm pretty sure that the language and the procedures, a number of years ago even said what you guys were just talking about, that technically, an IEP for another state can be honored. But then I think even then it alluded to, but we really want an Iowa IEP type of thing. I mean, but that kind of goes both ways, because I will tell districts if a kid moves to North Carolina and you have a copy of their IEP, you really should try to honor that IEP as soon as possible, tomorrow if you can. But realistically, we know it takes time to get things into the Iowa system.
And it goes back to, Ron, too, that a move-in IEP is just, if you think about it as it's just to get that kid on count.
Right.
And I think that was a difference than what it was initially perceived as when it was started in the system, because it was that, hey, you could just get that kid on count. And I think if you look at the manual now, it's saying that it's only for count time purposes, where I know in past it's been used throughout the year.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go back to it's only for the purpose of getting that kid on count,
Mm-hmm.
then we do an IEP as soon as possible. I will also say, Joni had said sometimes that, I think Joni did, that when a move-in IEP came in, sometimes they do a whole IEP. I'll be honest with you, I would question that with the teacher to find out if they really meant to do a move-in IEP or if they meant to do a complete IEP. Because if they filled it all in, then why not just mark it, if they're in agreement, mark it as a complete IEP so that we don't have to turn around in 30 days and redo that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's all part of the confusion. I agree on that, because like I said, if they did end up, if the kid moves in 5 days before count and they're able to write a review IEP, then to me, so be it. You don't have to call it a move-in. You can just call it a review. It's just that idea that that's not always feasible for these last-minute kids. So this choice kind of came into play, and you can think of all kinds of issues, like if you just left the move in there, that's really an incomplete Iowa IEP. I mean, how would the teacher progress monitor? So they wouldn't have a goal, they wouldn't have progress monitoring, so they would not technically, they'd be caught in that, and potentially not having that for months if they didn't get a new one in place. So
yeah. Karen, as you said, I know that move-in is used here throughout the year. So we're going to return those IEPs, and the system will let them change that to a review or a reeval?
Yes, it will.
Perfect.
And maybe this is something that Ron can send out to all the building reps too, so that they're aware of it, because really that's where it probably needs to start as well.
Yep, we were just talking about a move-in last week, and so it really is not an option.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And
Honestly, Faith, to be honest with you, one of the reasons this came up is I had a teacher get a little crabby with me because she couldn't make this IEP an amendment. So I started doing some further checking and found out that it was a move-in IEP. And I'm like, no, we should never have done it as a move-in IEP. And that part of that, I'll take full blame for that. Part of that was my fault, and it wasn't until I did some further investigation into it that it's like, okay, so I need to change my way of thinking on move-in IEPs. And we got to talking about it, and we thought, well, that's good information to give out to everybody.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen.
And I think for a few of these kids out there where there's where a kid moves in and they feel like, gee, we're not sure if we have all the information we need, that's kind of where an interim can come into place as well. And I know that I feel like I'm going to confuse the waters here, because you don't have to use an interim, but it's an option. But even when people do an interim, sometimes I will tell them, I mean, if you have the information you need to do a review IEP, do that, because you can always amend it. But that's the kind of goofy thing about an interim IEP, is that you might do it because you think you need more information to get a good IEP, but the system is still going to make you fill in every blank. So what are you going to put in there, kind of a thing. So yeah.
Here's a goofy question, but why don't they just take the interim out? If they've got a regular IEP, why wasn't an amendment what they would need to do rather than an interim?
Pam, we actually had one kid here, and this will probably be a really good explanation.
Okay.
They could not find a program for the kid, and so the kid was placed at home until an appropriate program could be found. So in the meantime, the team did an interim, because that interim's only good for 30 days. And after 30 days, it has to be reviewed and another interim done, if that's what they choose to, until an appropriate placement could be found. Does that help?
So these are few and far in between.
Yeah, they really are.
Okay, so really, that to me, because I don't really know that I've ever had an interim.
Actually, I hadn't had a whole lot, but with a particular family, I've had a couple of them now.
Okay. Well, I'm glad mine are stable.
Yeah, that one you gave, Karen, is a good example. I mean, I can think of a couple others, like, well, if let's say if an IEP team is looking into some sort of a special school placement for behavior, or maybe the students kind of on the road to a residential placement, they might do an interim just to get the student by, and that interim is probably going to look dramatically different than what the IEP is going to look like when they get to where they may be going. And so then it'd be the issue of they might think, we're probably going to be starting from scratch anyway, or the residential placement might be starting from scratch, so an interim makes more sense then.
So an interim makes more sense than an amendment, because wouldn't they amend it for the same reason?
You could see, and that's why it is yet another source of confusion, kind of thing, because frankly, either one could work, and they wouldn't be doing anything wrong. But let's imagine if Johnny, if I'm going to give him an interim and I'm going to do some temporary homebound tutorial kind of an IEP, and then in 20 days he's on his way to Boys Town.
Or Apex.
Well, to amend that homebound IEP, we're probably going to be changing 80% of the IEP, and they might feel like, you know what, they might as well start from scratch. You see what I mean? That's
okay.
That type of a thing. So,
all right, thank you.
Yeah.
You might send that in your blog too, Ron.
Yeah, this is a good one to get at. One where either in there or just through, but probably the teachers and probably the teachers and reps would be good, because it just it seems like this one still just continues to be kind of a confusing one. I agree.
It just seems to have a lot of gray areas. But we live on gray areas.
Yes, we do. All right. I'm gonna continue on here, and again, anybody jump in as you need to. This next topic here, disabilities. This is just a reminder, because and some of these things pop up around count time, because we just see them when we're running all these kids. But just a reminder that in our Iowa model, eligible individual should be the primary disability code. and I'll skip the second bullet for the second here, but I'll come back to it. So EI should always be primary. But this chart that I think you've seen before, which was really just, it reflects, a memo from the Department of Education a number of years ago, but we're still operating under that. The department still does ask for kids with certain types of disabilities to have a secondary or tertiary code if they fall into these areas. And you're familiar with these: the autism, deafblind, visual impairments, severe cognitive disability, deaf and hard of hearing. And the original reasoning for that was that even though we became a non-categorical state many years ago, the state had a need to sometimes look at these groups of kids for specific reasons, to track the achievement of kids that have visual impairments or hearing impairments. So we were still asked to get these kinds of codes. And so, for the most part, like, for example, when you've got your autism team folks out there, oftentimes when appropriate, they may be coaching, teachers and IEP teams to use that AT code, but it should be secondary. Often kids that have severe cognitive disabilities, that SP is appearing as a secondary. When we have our audiologist hearing teachers involved, we're often getting those DF or HI codes in their secondary. But they shouldn't be a primary code.
The one reason this came up, if I can interject here, is
Yeah.
when we ran reports, we were seeing that EI wasn't listed as 01, so we did further investigation. And what happens is when you select EI, 01 goes in as the number for the disability. Well, then if you selected AT and forgot to change that number to 02, AT took precedence over EI. So all we're asking is just kind of pay attention when you do have more than one disability, if you don't mind, and make sure you change it to a different number like 02, 03 for if they have 2 or 3 different disabilities.
And I think bottom line, it's more of a consistency issue, probably more than anything else. And it is one of those weird, situations in Iowa that the system still has these other codes. It still has LD and BD and things like that from years gone by that we're not really using. So you might ask yourself, why are they still in the system? I ask myself that too. I don't know that there's we would ever get a really crystal clear question from DE about that, other than the fact that I know that so our direction is use EI as a primary disability. On the other hand, if there was Iowa as a non-categorical state, has to certify that we are identifying all the kids with all these disabilities, with LD, with BD, these categorical areas that fall under IDEA. We have to say, yeah, we have a non-categorical system, but we're catching all these kids and we're working with them. So the codes still sit there in the system. If there was a parent that absolutely insisted that I want my child is autistic and I want them to be called autistic, an IEP team could make a very unusual decision to make that the first, even for LD, things like that. There's a whole, dyslexia lobby out there that, there might be a parent who wants to insist that LD be used. So I think we almost never see that, but the possibility is out there. But unless there's some really extenuating circumstance, the guidance statewide is to use EI and then only these as secondary or tertiary. The second bullet that I jumped over, the SL, sometimes that's still, and people can chime in, sometimes the speech folks still want to throw that in there, and it's really not supposed to be. Again, confusion because it's out there in the system. Are a lot of you, or just did we see a lot of those in the count just showing up?
I see them added from time to time
Mm-hmm.
by my speechies.
Mm-hmm.
I just return them or change it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yes, we did note some of them when we were looking at count data.
Okay. And, bottom line, does anything terrible happen if that's in there? No. It's just more of a consistency issue. And, if we have people kind of doing different things, then other people start to wonder if they're doing it wrong. So there's just not a need for that to be in there. And, it may be some folks that are doing it from practices years gone by, or it may be some new folks that just don't realize that. So if you spot those, just let's get those fixed and out of there, just for clarity. Any questions on that discussion, the disabilities? And Joni's lights just went off. It looks like that was different. We can't hear you, Joni, but that's okay. We're glad you're in the light again.
I wasn't moving enough. I had to wave my arms, get them back on.
Oh, the photo sensor things. Got it. Okay. All right. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about the weighting matrices, and just for the purpose of kind of making sure that we're all on the same page with how we're tackling these. And as you guys know, some of you would have watched this. We had this. This is we're not going to sit here and watch that today, but we're going to be referencing the matrices a little bit. There was a need for the matrix to change back in late September. And you probably remember that this request came from the finance department at the DE, and the critique was, someone noticed that the statewide matrix had dollar signs referenced. It had, so in certain categories it said if it costs this much to this much, you get 1 point. This much to this much, you get 2 points. And it was deemed to be not appropriate. The idea was that weighting should be based on a description of the services. And that was brought to the attention of the state special ed directors, and the special ed directors even said, okay, but can we change it after count? And the answer was no. There was kind of a sense of urgency. This needed to be changed right away. So it happened. We got them out there. But as you know, it was kind of right before count. And I don't think we had any major concerns over it, although a few things have popped up that are kind of things we'll need to kind of deal with now, and we wanted to kind of talk about them. So just as I'll pull up the K-12 one. Just as a reminder to everybody, the only part that changed was this row 7 year purchase assistive technology, and that's the one that previously had with the dollar sign breakdowns. And now that's changed to a more descriptive to get the 1 or 2 points there. And so you have questions like minor equipment or software needs, and a few things described there. And again, the language is in excess of what typical students would have. And then we have the word significant. So you might be thinking to yourself, that sounds a little bit gray, and it kind of is, although there are some examples here. I mean, you can see the difference between a piece of software and a full-blown amplification system, that kind of thing, or a pricey piece of equipment like a stander or a gate trainer or something like that. So it was described in terms of, to make us think of, what's the typical kind of equipment or assistive tech that a student has in gen ed, and are we adding to something in excess of that? That's where the points come in. So that was a change. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of review with everybody was there are these underlying phrases here. There's year of purchase and year of expenditure. So it's kind of funny and almost a little bit ironic that even though we've taken the dollar signs out, we're still talking about when you put money out in here. I mean, that's ultimately, for kids that if their program is relatively more expensive than for other students who go up in weighting. But those are important phrases because in order for us to validate these weightings, we really do need to know. So if you put something in there, if you put a piece of software, or if the IEP team does rather, we somehow need to know, did they purchase it this year for that point or points to count? Or was there a piece of equipment where there was a maintenance issue that, did we spend it in this IEP period? So, and this is where, and we did talk to we had our special ed coordinators meeting recently, and we know that doesn't always get down to the right people, but this was all kind of reviewed with that group as well. And so if an IEP on page F says, here's one example, Google Read and Write is software that interacts with Google Docs that would be assistive technology, has a lot of great tools in it. And it's one that, a district would pay like $150 a year. It's like an annual fee to activate the full version of that. So if a district put on page F, Susie needs an annual subscription to Google Read and Write, and we use that to enhance her writing and reading. That's going to be clearly a point. And that's one that could be a point every year if that's because it's a purchase every year. They have to pay that fee. And even though it's only $150, that would be an ongoing expense. If the IEP says we just bought an amplification system, clearly that's going to be up here. That's going to be 2 points because that's a very large expenditure. So that would be a 1 year kind of a thing. On the other hand, if that was bought 2 years ago and the current IEP might say the district maintains an amplification system for Susie so that she has this available to her. That's going to be more of a maintenance that would probably be more of a 1 point. So I'm making sense there. That's where we're trying to get districts to make sure that they're clear. If they're, for lack of a better word, if they're wanting, for points to be counted in this area, the IEP needs to be clear. Did we buy something this year, or are we maintaining something? That could be a service contract for the amplification system, and that might be a couple $100 a year or whatever that would be. So let me just pause there. Questions that you guys have, or has this? I'd love to hear. Has this come up in your regions since this came out? Again, it was just seems like it was kind of thrown at us right before count time. I'm wondering if questions have been coming up on this, or if it's been pretty quiet.
Yeah, of course we had problems, but we got it solved. Because we had Jenny Backaroo. That she didn't want to put a date on it, and it was new equipment for a child. So, but I think we got it under control now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and when when I would get an IEP given to me, to check, just to validate waiting, sometimes it just, it would require me to make a phone call or an email saying, hey, it's a little bit unclear on here about this. Is this a new piece of equipment? Or, sometimes just asking the district to clarify, what did you really mean here? And, of course, there's like many things that will bring up gray areas. I had just the other day, I had someone say, my district told me that their student uses the PACS program, Picture Exchange Communication System, and that's assistive technology, so they'll put a 1 on there, right? They'll get 1 point. I have to kind of pause and think about that because, well, it is considered augmentative communication, but it's a low-tech system which involves kids, passing pictures to communicate, what they want, using picture boards and things like that. And my answer was, well, this is getting into expenditures. If your only expense is printing pictures, probably doesn't get a point. It belongs in the IEP, absolutely. If the student needs it, that's something that should be indicated on there. But on the other hand, if the district said, we bought software to produce these pictures, then that might be a point. So then it would kind of depend. So like Boardmaker, for example, a lot of our speech folks have it. If an IEP said, our district purchased Boardmaker in order to do PECS, then there you go. That would, to me, that would be a point on the year of purchase, but then next year it might not. So then the clarity in there helps us decide whether or not to give a point. Then I would say, okay, so then that was the assistive tech was kind of, that was really the new part of the matrix. The other part that is not new, but I think is an ongoing, I have this little link here, documenting paraprofessional services. We know this is not new, but at least in kind of my little part of the world, this continues to be kind of a tough one, because if we're not sure about how to weight an IEP due to paraprofessional services, the districts, we want them to be we keep trying to encourage them to be as clear as possible. And the guidance, and this is not new, but the guidance continues to be, para services should always be on the services page, not on the activities tab. Just kind of, we still see some of those vague references on the activities tab. There'll be a para if necessary, kind of a thing. And that, we really wouldn't view that as a weightable kind of a factor, because that sounds more like, it sounds more like a general ed paraprofessional that's just kind of out there, and occasionally if Johnny needs help, they might provide help. So as we know, it's supposed to be much clearer than that. The TA code is for instructional, and it should be coded as such on the services page. There should be a clear description of, it doesn't need to be a book, but what is that para doing and how much time are they doing it for the student. And if it's more than a 1-to-1 ratio, it's good, it's better if they say that. We will see IEPs that'll say the para is with Susie all day, but it's a 1-to-2 ratio. We see that sometimes. But if they say that in the IEP, then that's helpful, because we can look at the weighting matrix and say, well, if it's a 1-to-2 ratio, then that para is probably not, can't spend more than half of their time with one student. So that would impact the points we put there. So we've got TA and we've got the PP example for health and behavior.
Ron, could you share that with the building reps when you do the interim teachers? Only because in the last couple months, I've had numerous questions on what do I put to get that para on there. So this way they would have an example of what they need to put in there.
You bet, yeah.
Thank you.
And by the way, this is not trying to say that paras can only be one-on-one. Not at all. But the point is, be really clear. And sometimes it might be Johnny might need a TA just in these two gen ed classes, but then it should say that, and it should reflect the number of minutes where that para is going to be helping them.
Right. I just got a couple of new building reps that
You bet.
they're a little fuzzy.
Okay. Any thoughts or questions about those two areas? So it was the equipment / assistive tech and the para services are probably, if there's a question about weighting, more often than not, it's going to involve one of those, hey, does this tip the scale a little bit in the other direction, or whatever that would be. So. Okay. This next little section of the agenda here, you can see I've added some text, just for what I think is going to be clarity here, better clarity. And where is this coming from? This is the issue of what do we do for screening for weighting, and when does it go to a regional administrator for a check? If you link here, you might remember from quite a few years ago, this was kind of and this still lives on our website. This was kind of our attempt to say, what are the things that we need to check in the submit to implement process. what are the things we need to be checking within this document. It had that part about what to do about the weightings, and thought we would just do kind of a review, kind of clarification. I just lifted the language from that and just wanted to kind of go through this with everybody to make sure we're on similar pages here on how we handle this and in our different regional offices. Just a reminder that for weighting review, I mean, there's still that principle that the AA is responsible for assigning the appropriate weightings for students. I mean, that's definitely in code. With that, it's absolutely true that every AA does a little bit differently. Really, I mean, I feel confident in saying that. I go to these state procedures meetings, and people do this in different ways. I mean, ultimately, though, we're supposed to be the bottom line of determining, does the student have the correct weighting, getting that into account, and so forth. There are some AAs that, literally have people with full-time jobs that just review IEPs and assign weightings. So that happens in some AAs. Our model, and I think it's similar to a number of AAs as well, is that you folks are on the receiving end and are doing more of a screening level review of the weighting, but as questions arise, you're passing it on to a regional administrator to validate the weighting as needed. So we want to talk a little bit about, make it a little bit clearer, like when would you need to pass it on to a regional administrator for a review. So here's what's, I'll just put this up on screen. I think we can see most of it at one time here. Move my toolbar there. And also, sorry, I'm going back here. There's this for child find, for anything involving child find, which includes initial evaluations, EER times, and reevaluations. We do know that our AA special education reps, they are supposed to be present at all those occasions. So they are kind of on the ground level in their part. So we kind of view them as also guiding the weighting process because, we know that the system wants that in there when they submit it. But here's what we have. Red has been something that's been added, just hopefully for clarity. So number one, each time an IEP is reviewed for data entry, screen the IEP services and supports and make a comparison of the matrix. This will help us determine if a review by regional administrator is necessary. I chose the word screen, which I think is what most everybody is doing. Does that mean you have to score every single one? No, but yeah, as you're doing the required data entry and you're looking at page F and you're looking at the services and supports, you may have a copy of the matrix on your desk. You're referencing that, and that kind of gives you a heads up if you see something that maybe isn't right. So kind of a cursory review, a screening. If you're looking at page F and all you see is 45 minutes a day of resource support, and that has been submitted as a level 3 IEP, that's probably one that you should pass on to a regional administrator to make sure that that's correct. So just as you're doing your data entry, just do that screening to see if you see any flags, and I think that's happening pretty often. And then these specific things that I just mentioned here, just if you would just kind of make sure you have your eye on how they're documenting paraprofessional services or assistive tech, and again, if you feel like the weighting does not look right, pass it on to your regional administrator to make a decision. For initials, you can see the strikeout here in that original document from way back when. We had said enter what is given. You need to be a little bit careful about that because we kind of assumed, I think at the time, or we were thinking, oh, usually an initial is going to be a level 1. That may or may not be true. Sometimes you have unusual cases where a kid is identified for special education in high school and they're going right to a special school for behavior. And, sometimes you have initials that result in a level 2 or 3 kid. But basically, we would say for initials, thinking about what's been said above here, if a question is raised, have an RA review it. And this, we've traditionally done this if a level has increased. If it was level 1 in the past and it comes in as level 2, we'd want an RA to review that. For levels that decrease, you can use your discretion.
Ron?
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much.
That's okay. I have several level 3 programs, which they automatically write the IEPs into level 3s when they get there. Have you talked to Terry? Does she want to review those? Because I haven't been doing that.
If so you mean when they go there, they
might be a 2 and then they'll end up being a 3 because then they're transporting out of district, which gives them 3 points, which will make them their 10. So I mean, I know that they're a level 3, so I'm not having Terry look at them. I don't care. I just haven't been doing that because it's a 3 program and they're going to get charged 3 money, and I didn't think it was necessary, but if it is, I can. If it's
and I can and should review this with the whole group again too. But I mean that is something that we technically had in place for in the past year. If it goes up, we were supposed to validate it as being appropriate. Now I mean, I'll give you an example. Like when I get an IEP to review often, and this isn't a requirement, but me personally, I write a little memo just saying I scored this and this is what I got. I mean, I like that more for myself rather than anything else, just so that I have a record of what if I made a decision. But here's a parallel to what you're just saying here. Right here in Atlantic, there's the Link Center, which is a behavioral program. All the kids there end up being level 3. When a kid goes there, Karen will give me that IEP, but oftentimes I'll just take a quick glance and I'll just initial that IMS summary versus doing an in-depth. You see what I mean? I just do the matrix and attach it to the IEP. Okay, yeah. That in other words, when you're giving one to Terry, that's what you do. Yeah.
Well, but I probably already put it away before. I mean, I'll send Terry an email saying that it has gone to a level 3 because he's now at Apex.
That's what you have done, you mean? Or yeah, I mean, well, so
having her sign each one of them.
Yeah, so I mean, that's again, we've and maybe we should someday, but I mean, with the RAs, how they react to that is a little bit, we do it a little bit differently. But I just was giving an example, kind of similar that for that Link Center program.
I'm not trying to take her job away. I just
no.
try to make it easier for her so she doesn't have to look at.
And that's really what Karen does exactly the same thing for the Link Center, because to be totally honest, I'm not spending a whole lot of time looking at that. I'm just initialing it because she said, that she'll just say, this is a Link Center. I'll say, so be it. It's kind of, rare exceptions. I mean, we had a case where a kid was going there part-time and we had to figure out if that was 2 or 3 or what that would be. But,
okay, no problem. I'll give them to her. I just didn't know if.
Yeah. And it just.
Or I'll talk to her and see what she wants to do.
She should review them, but it may take, just like for me in the similar cases, it takes about 20 seconds, to be honest with you, for me.
Right. It's just going to sit on her desk for that length of time until she gets here.
Okay.
But no problem.
Let's see. Okay. Number 6, if there's a support service, speech only, IEP that goes to any level of service, enter I had struck out again, enter what is given, but see above, so that's a little bit dangerous too. What we previously said, enter what is given, because there would be those rare occasions where it would be a higher level, higher or lower weighting, but I'm sorry, I didn't say that very clearly. Okay, let's read what it says there. If there is a support service such as speech only that goes, I'm really confusing everybody, that goes to any level of service. So that would be like your speech only IEP, non-weighted, and all of a sudden they get a reading goal. That does happen. We could assume that, well, that's probably only never going to be anything but level 1, but you could have those rare occasions where the kid was speech only, huge behaviors came to be, they ended up in a specialized program, and that kid could become level 2 or level 3. So just kind of referring everybody to the screen. If there's a question, have it RA review it. Okay, and then number 7, for students who move in from out of state, it's a timely topic there. The IEP team and the AA Special Ed Rep are gonna, since that really is kind of a child find coming from a new state kind of event, they would determine the appropriate weighting based on, looking at that IEP documentation. And so they're going to submit that, but the same principles would apply. If you see something that is a flag, that can be reviewed further as well. So really, other than a little bit of language smithing here, this is not new. It's just kind of, but it's kind of reminding you that, well, there are a few newer things like this language on assistive tech. So if you see something in there and it appears that, when you're entering an IEP and it appears that someone's given some points for assistive tech or equipment and you're not sure if that's appropriate, pass that on and can kind of continue to pass on questionable para services as well. Other things on weighting or other confusing ones that have come up this year that may or may not have to do with the changes, or just things that you've had? Okay. Moving down the agenda here, this is bringing this up because this did come up about count time. I think it does almost every year. If you want to go to that, well, I'll bring it up here. Part-time, full-time handout. It seems to come up every year at count time, and we had, and it did again this year. So we wanted to kind of review this. Just a reminder that preschoolers, we got our preschoolers, they can be coded as either full-time or part-time in the weighted count. And it's just simply 20 or more hours of preschool service is full-time. If they're less than 20 hours, they'd be considered part-time. This question came up, and we realized that because the question came up of what about single service kids? How do we list them? Because like a walk-in speech. We were remembering that, yeah, we were told just call them full-time because they're unique and they're not weighted. We were wondering why, but Karen, I think you lifted this from IMS meeting notes in 2009. Is that right, Karen? An oldie but a goodie.
Yep, that's correct.
So yeah, if it's support services only, we code them as full-time just for consistency. There's really not any impact, but that's what we were told a number of years ago to do that. But this actually, and if districts question this, that really is an Iowa code thing. If you go into Iowa code, it reminds us. I mean, it does actually give us that 20-hour rule for part-time or full-time participation. And for preschoolers, it does get strange sometimes because you have some. I can think of a couple programs that have fluctuated between giving kids a full-time versus a part-time status. So for example, if the kids stay for lunch, then all of a sudden magically they're over 20 hours. If they don't stay for lunch, they're not. But we just need to remember that that is the ruling for weighting. And this is kind of a nice handout, just a reminder of ways that you can check. So if for preschoolers, would ask you to kind of keep your eye on this, to check this as preschoolers come in, the full-time versus part-time. If we catch them when they come in, then they won't come up as issues at count time, because then you kind of end up with this feeling like you're, there's times where we say, oh, here's 3 kids and they're really part-time, so we're gonna have to move those down. Then they kind of feel like, we're doing something to them. But if we can catch them as they come in, they can just be corrected right away. There's different places we can look. Probably the easiest way is to look at that EC worksheet, and it gives it, that'll typically give the total hours per week. And so that'll help us to know whether that student is full-time or part-time. Any thoughts out there on this one, or have you had districts, wanting to have different interpretations or problems with this? I just feel like if we kind of keep our eyes on this one as they come in, they won't come back to haunt us at count time. Yeah. All right, review of maintenance, paper files, electronic files. This is not new. I'm going to pull this up. I wanted to let you know that the whole issue of records, both, how do we maintain our records, physical records, electronic records, it seems to always be, there's questions all the time across the state, and when we have the different state procedures meetings and the directors and so forth, it always comes up that while we've made a lot of ground in the AA system and doing things in a consistent way, different AAs are handling this differently. And starting really over a year ago, we were trying to put together this, I guess, kind of a white paper that would, kind of everything we need to know about how we maintain our records in Green Hills AEA. That's still kind of a work in progress. But as we started looking at that, in fact, there was a small committee that was looking at that. We found that, the more we talked about it, the more questions that came up. That happens sometimes in the world of special education. But probably the biggest thing is, how we treat electronic documents, and and even what is what is personally identifiable information where we have to be careful with. So as an example, the Department of Education in certain departments, I help with state alternate assessment and things like that. So sometimes I have teachers saying, I can't get the system to work for my student. The DE and DLM, which is the alternate assessment site, the company that operates that, they take the position that we shouldn't even be putting students' names in emails. So, to certain DE contacts, if I say, Johnny Smith is not working in DLM, I would kind of get chided saying, you're not using a secure system. Send me the student's ID number instead of their name. So we have things like that, but we know that there's tons of email communications going on out there. Certainly for me, I would say, with kids' names and things like that. So there's a lot of work out there trying to figure out, what is the right way to handle this. Even the question of there's lots and lots of data that's out there on Google Docs. My personal position would be that, well, if you have a spreadsheet of student information in Google Docs that's part of your records, whether it be you guys are using it or special ed reps, it's a password protected system. You're only giving access to the appropriate people. Other people have a little bit of a different view on that, saying that's not secure enough. You should be doing something different. So it's a work in progress to figure out what's the best practice for handling all these things. And in fact, our tech guys are even having a little bit of discussion on, just overall records in the whole AA, how are we handling this? So we'll continue with that. But we just wanted to, at a recent admin meeting, the question came up of, are we all doing things the same way as far as what we are keeping in paper format and what we're keeping in electronic format? And I brought up this document that I know will look familiar to you, and we just kind of reiterated this is what we said, what we're doing right now. So just wanted to kind of review it, make sure that we're all doing this in the same way with not a whole lot of variation. So let's just walk through this as kind of a review. And this, you'll remember, this document has evolved over the years because we know that certain things that used to be templates are now part of the web IEP system. But this document starts out just talking about, while that's, we know that the IEP that lives in web IEP, we're treating that as the official IEP. That's the safest thing to do because we know that there's different draft versions out there and things like that. But anything that really is not part of that web IP system, we're asking for that to be uploaded in associated files. And at a certain time, some of you remember way back when we didn't have as much confidence that documents would be safe in associated files. I think we have that now. I mean, they're going to be there for the duration if we upload them. So section 2 here is just listing all the things that when we have them need to be uploaded. And you can see this first, really everything we see here happen to be things that have a physical parent signature. So we have wanted to get these things scanned up there into associated files. Consent forms, Medicaid reimbursement forms. The reevaluation notice, if it does have a signature, we want that up there. And the famous destruct form. Recent conversations, we are still, we still want to try to get this as much as we can. And you'll remember this is the form that at the time of student exit, if that says in 5 years we're going to destroy your child's record, sign here. And if we have that on file, that means we would not be required to send the parent a letter in 5 years. So we're still doing our best to get that. We know that that's not perfect. Can I do a little bit of a straw poll here? I mean, a few of you want to kind of chime in. How hard or easy has it been to get that for students?
I think it depends on the building rep, Ron, as to whether they act purposely try to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, it kind of depends on the reason they're exiting, or mine are. I might get them for grads, but I very seldom get them for RRGs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I very rarely get one for speech only exit.
Okay. And that's probably another one that warrants, any reminders when I'm these kind of my list of reminder things to send out. This might be one to join the reminder list. If it's one of those things that, the more of these we have, the idea is that it would reduce the number of families we need to notify, because, we know that's a really imperfect system, because you've all, I think, experienced getting the big stack of letters back that you mailed out. But we're going to do our best to get these. And, again, sometimes it's really difficult. If a kid drops out, they just kind of disappear. We're not likely to have this, but we're going to get this when we can. And that, I think, in the long run is going to help us.
Ron?
Yeah.
I seem to have problems getting that form for graduation and such. It would be helpful if you put that in. With my Council Bluffs High Schools, there's hundreds of the graduation exits, and I thought that I wasn't to pin for that. Is that still correct, or has that been changed?
No, you're right. You're right, Sandy, because we kind of identified that as, it was one of those things that we could be holding a lot of files for a long time because,
Yes.
because it's just, it's kind of like the end of the road. They're gone. We need to do the best we can to get them, and that's really, bottom line.
Usually when spring comes, I will send out the form, and I'll send out a copy of a letter that was sent out that says, now we should be getting this. And I will send that to the building reps and the lead teachers and remind them.
Okay.
And sometimes I'll double check to see, do you have the form? I'm prompting, but it's not real accurate receiving them from CB.
Sure.
Well, the other thing is if you have the 18-year-old sign it, is that, and that's legal, but
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. How?
It's confusing that way too, because the parent or student signs it, sometimes both at the meeting. And then, if we don't have that, what do we do 5 years from now? We mail out to the family, and technically it should be going to the student, but where are they? We don't know. So it's all very tricky. This is our best attempt to, because the requirement is that before you destroy records, you're supposed to notify, and that's the requirement. And so then this method came up with, well, we're going to notify them at the time of exit, and basically say we're not going to tell you again. So no, I think this just continues to be, we do the best we can with this, at minimum, when it's time for those letters to go out, bottom line, if you're about to mail letters and you have your destruct files near you, any file that has that in there, letter doesn't need to go. So that should reduce some of that mailing, some of that paperwork down the road, but not a perfect system by any means. And when that form came out a number of years ago, it really was. It's a template. It's not living away by P. It's actually not a quote required form in Iowa. We did decide as an AA we were going to do our best to use it because we thought it would help us down the road. Some AAs have not used that. Like I said, I learn a lot of things when I go to these state procedures meetings. There is one AA does not use it at all, and they don't destroy anything because which sounds strange, but what they've gone to is that anything that's in paper form after 5 years, they scan it and they say they're going to keep it forever. So there you go. That's one way of handling it. So I don't think I like that idea. Unless
If we have that letter, do we just mark then on the list that letter in file?
Absolutely, yeah. If that letter is on file,
Okay.
then we don't need to mail anything out. No, that's the parents have been. That's the position. They've been duly informed at the time of exit that unless you tell us otherwise, in 5 years we're going to destroy these records. So we wouldn't have to notify them again. It's the ones where we never got that is where we'll still have that obligation. So again, this document, which that we have here, is just saying, it's basically saying most everything is electronic, and only those things mentioned above will be uploaded to associated files. But this is the part that hopefully we're being consistent on. The only paper documents that will be maintained in the physical AA student file will be the IMS data summary, page F, the prior written notice, and copies of any document with the required parent signature. This small paper file will allow for a snapshot of key services to be maintained in the physical file, while the vast majority of the IEP will be maintained only electronically. And so we said we'd print out that summary report. That would be a cover sheet. We'd stamp it as entered, and that would be our much thinner paper file that would be in there. So that just a reminder that as of right now, that's what we decided to do. Could we have said we don't even need to print page F? We don't need to even print pirate notes. We could have said that because those are all living out there. The thought at the time was it would still be worthwhile to have a very streamlined paper document. And so that's what we're doing at this time. I think some AAs probably print even less than that. So. Thoughts or questions on that? This is just really more of a kind of bringing it back to all of our attention. And all right. This last item on here, gradual transition from Part C to Part B. I think most of you are aware of this. Angie Hance had kind of sent out sort of training information on this in the electronic format. With her, I mean, she has her Part C hat, and she also has her the special ed rep kind of coordinator hat as well. But the change here, just to remind everybody, is that in the past and currently, we're in transition time here. Our Part C, our early access staff, when kids were changing, when they were potentially eligible for Part B services, when they were going to be turning 3, the early access people would do the majority or all of the EER, and they would be somewhat active in certain cases in drafting that initial IEP when kids were eligible for Part B. Decision was made to transfer more of that responsibility, most of that responsibility, to Part B staff. So as a consequence, this is just, for everybody's awareness. I mean, and some of you have had this happen already. You will have more of your Part B people, your special ed reps and so forth, and your speech folks that will be needing access to those EERs, because they're going to evolve into the primary author of them, whereas in the past the primary author has been our early access folks. Yeah, so that's really the big message here, is that you will have more of these folks that will need access to the EER when this transition is going on. Some of you have probably had people ask already, but just wanted to kind of keep this on your radar screen that this is going to be happening. And Angie had kind of put that out as, I guess it would have been back in November, the information came out to people, and it went to LEAs as well. So, and it would, and the thought was we would gradually transition and make this happen by March. So you probably have some teams that are already doing this, and some that are kind of in a transition period. If this has come up, have there been any problems or issues, like on the IMS side of things, that you guys have run into, or maybe you haven't run into this much yet? It'll be happening, like I said, gradually over a few months here. Pretty quiet out there. Okay. I'm practicing my wait time. So. All right. Well, these are the things that were on the agenda for today. Yeah, I would just say too that I don't know that we know any more. We know, of course, looming in the future here is the shift to a new IEP system that would be part of the larger state tier system. But I think probably a lot of you have, in the recent months or back in the fall, kind of heard that there had been problems with the tier system and questions raised, and so we don't know. I think any more now as far as whether there could be timelines changed on when we might have a new system. So at this point, we kind of just keep moving forward with the system we have and kind of status quo in that way. But so there's not much more that I can tell you about that. Aaron or Joni, can you think of anything else that while we have everybody together here, that we need to touch on, or are there questions from anybody else?
I can't think of anything else, Ron.
Okay.
I think you covered everything, Ron.
Will we be getting our reports to send out to the schools?
The FTE reports, you mean?
No, the counted weight.
Yep, I'm going to actually that's a very good question. This year we've uploaded the files into a Google Drive, and as soon as I get the email uploaded that you can send out to your superintendents, we will give you guys the link and you can access it, and then you can print them. And I guess I would kind of think that maybe we might want to just email out a copy to them, and then you can keep a hard copy if you want, or if you want to print them, you can, but they will be in PDF files.
Okay. And did you say that the FTE was coming because
Someday the FTE, we've asked for it, and we have not received it yet. So I will ask again.
Okay, because I'm not unfortunately, but I'm gone most of February, so
Okay.
just trying to make sure that I have it done before I leave. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining in today, and enjoy the rest of this chilly day. Everybody have a great Christmas. A few more days, right?
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Happy holidays.
You bet. Take care. Bye, folks.
Bye.